Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. The new year brings a new edition of the WRAL Promise Tracker. That's our annual check-in to see whether North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper has made good on his campaign promises. WRAL State Government reporter Travis Fain checked progress on Cooper's goals related to Medicaid expansion, teacher pay, and more. Travis joins us today to tell us all about it. Travis, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Travis, before we get into the nitty-gritty, very quickly explain what is the Promise Tracker and what does it aim to do?
So the idea is, these folks run for office and they make various promises, or they say, I will work on this. And so it's a systematic effort to, as the years progress, look and see how they do. WRAL started this before my time under Governor Pat McCrory. There was a Promise Tracker. And then with Roy Cooper's first term, there was a Promise Tracker. And now we're halfway through his second term, and we're doing our, third iteration here of the Promise Tracker and updating it, 2 years into his 4-year and final term here.
And so you pick out a number of promises that he's made. How do you decide on what to pick out and what to grade him on?
So that decision happens as he comes into office. So, he was reelected in 2020. And we decide, all right, here's what we're going to look at. Here are the 9 things we're going to look at. And that stays static. The only thing that changes is we move him kind of up and down a ranking system. And it's the NC Capital team, which is our state government team here. We just kind of put our heads together. We say, okay, this has happened. This hasn't happened. And it just all kind of gets boiled down to yes, no, maybe sorts of rankings.
And I presume it's just based on maybe clear statements he's made, when I'm governor, I will do X. And that's where you...
That's right. Although there's some nuance there because you got to think about it. Rarely does a politician say, I will accomplish X. It's more along the lines of, I am really going to work hard on X. And the way we look at it is, we use the word promise maybe fairly broadly, but if you run on Medicaid expansion, for example, and then Medicaid expansion does not happen during the 8 years you were in office, that is not success, right? Whether you promised that it would happen or you promised you'd work really hard for it, at the bottom, you either got to compromise your way to it, even with a Republican legislature when you're a Democratic governor, or you got to find a way, or we're not giving you positive marks on it.
Right. So let's get into it. So this time around, it seems like there was movement in at least a couple areas. One was related to public education. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So there are 2 things here. There are 3 really for public education: school construction money, which we're not going to talk about right this second; teacher pay, which we're also not going to talk about right this second. But the one you're asking about, I think, is per pupil funding. We said, all right, he's in office for 4 years. Does per pupil funding, the amount we spend per kid in our school system, does it go up most of those years? So that'll be 3 out of 4. Now, obviously, we've only had 2 years, so we can't say, yes, he's achieved it. But it has gone up the last couple of years. Bit of a lagging the way it's – you have to wait till the school year is over to grade it. But anyway, it's looking good. It was a fairly low bar to meet because per pupil funding typically does go up every year. And we've moved him to kept so far. So all these promises start out in progress, but we feel like there's been enough of a good faith effort on this to move that to kept so far, which is very similar to in progress. It basically means we're going to wait and see, but this is looking positive.
Did he face any resistance in that area? I mean, obviously, he's a Democrat and Democratic governor, and then you've got the General Assembly that's controlled by Republicans. Yeah,
not a ton. For this one that has kind of a fairly low bar, this is a fairly baseline measurement. He has faced resistance on teacher pay, and of course that is your biggest expense, right, is what you pay teachers, principals, educators. He has wanted much larger teacher raises than the Republican legislature has been willing to approve, which is why we kind of kept him in progress on a more specific education funding metric, which is teacher pay. He wants to go up to the national average, which would require a really significant increase, I think $10,000, $12,000 a year increase on average to get us up there. It does not look like that's going to happen. We've kept that one in progress, though, for a few years because it's one of those that you can't really fully say yes, no until the end of his second term here.
Another area where Cooper has made some progress has been broadband access, right?
Yeah, and this is one where not a lot of good coming out of the pandemic, obviously. But one thing that did happen is just tons and tons of money from the federal government for various things, including broadband access, which obviously became more of an issue when we sent all the kids home to learn and have school from their house, and not all of them had internet access.
And basically, when we talk about broadband access, we're talking about faster internet, right?
Yeah. There's a federal definition for broadband, a certain amount of upload speed, a certain amount of download speed. But I mean, it has to be enough for you to watch a video and do something else at the same time. You know, broadband is what you have come to think of as the internet these days. Very few people are happy with less than broadband who also have access to the internet.
And so what was it like maybe going into 2022? I mean, were people just not able to access the internet in the way that people maybe in the major population centers of the state were?
Yeah, it's more of a rural issue. And I mean, there are varying counts. I think at the start of the second term, it was something like 212,000 households didn't have broadband access. But then the feds earmarked like $1 billion. There's another $1 billion and another bill. All this money started flowing. A lot of it hasn't been spent yet. But we have seen some spent, and we've seen increases. But the trend line is just clear. There is going to be significant increase, and that was our metric here. Do we see significant increase in access to broadband internet, which is kind of subjective term. I'll acknowledge that for everybody, but I don't think there's any doubt that we are seeing really significant increase in broadband access because of all this federal money. So, I mean, it's not necessarily anything Roy Cooper did, although he did prioritize this issue, as did the state legislature. And there is a bunch of state money that's been approved as well. But really, it was the federal pandemic money.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about where Cooper might move the needle in 2023. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain, who's been tracking Governor Roy Cooper's campaign promises. Travis, we talked about this a little bit in the first segment. The political situation is such that Cooper might not have the easiest time knocking out all these goals. He's a Democrat. The General Assembly is controlled by Republicans. Are there any goals that he might be able to meet that he hasn't met yet, considering those circumstances?
Yeah, there are actually a few. I think the biggest one is probably Medicaid expansion. I mean, this is one that he has been working toward since he was first elected his first term back in I guess he was elected in 2016 for the first time. And for the first time in that period, it looks like it might actually happen over the next year or so. A version of Medicaid expansion has passed the state Senate. Senate Republican leader Phil Berger is on board with it. A version of Medicaid expansion, or at least planning for it, has passed the House. Both those chambers controlled by Republicans. So Republicans kind of come around on this issue and are looking to expand Medicaid in North Carolina. I think we're one of like 12 or 13 states that hasn't. I mean, the writing is on the wall, but they haven't agreed how to do it and what to pair it with. I think the smart money says they'll figure that out over the next 6 months, year. That's no guarantee, obviously, but that looks like one, and a really big one. That's arguably Cooper's top priority his entire time in office, that he might be able to check off in the coming year. But it's in progress for now. We just, who knows?
What happens if they can't come to an agreement on that? What does that mean for the state in terms of dollars and cents?
Oh, it's billions and billions of dollars, including there are all sorts of sweeteners that the federal government over the years has added to try to entice these remaining states to expand Medicaid. And I mean, just if anybody doesn't know, Medicaid is a program that pays for health care. It's government-funded, taxpayer-funded insurance, basically, for children, people with significant disabilities, senior citizens, the elderly folks who need help. And I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of people in North Carolina that could have this extended to them, mostly kind of the working poor who make too much money to get free insurance now, but don't make enough to be able to afford it. So that's what we mean when we talk about expanded Medicaid. So billions of dollars, access for people, help for hospitals because of the money that would be flowing.
So we've noted that Cooper has failed to make good on some areas. Corporate tax cuts come to mind. Are there other goals that are in danger? Is there any way he can somehow manage to turn things around on corporate taxes? I mean, what are the areas that he's just probably going to run into a wall on?
Yeah, so far we've failed him on one promise. We failed him not this year, but last year, because he had said he wanted to halt or even roll back some planned corporate business tax cuts that Republicans had pushed, and the Republican majority is like, no, yeah, we're going to do it, buddy, and have done so and may do more. So, he's failed there. I don't see any going back there. Boost unemployment benefits. He has wanted to reform the unemployment system. We have some of the stingiest benefits in the nation. They got boosted during the pandemic by the feds. And then the people went back to work. So we had this real problem in our unemployment system, but we have not addressed this kind of structural, a lot of people would call it a problem, of the fairly stingy benefits. There at one point was some bipartisan agreement that was something that needed to happen. But with the pandemic and the way that shifted things, and then Republicans have been upset about some of the labor shortages we've had since then, kind of coming out of the pandemic proper, for lack of a better phrasing. This issue has just kind of fallen off the radar. Cooper's administration and says, hey, it's still a priority. We'll have to see. 2 years is a long time in government. It really is. It doesn't feel like it, but it is. But so I wonder if boosting those unemployment benefits is something that will be a goer, or if it will fall by the wayside.
Are there any major initiatives or efforts that we're not tracking as part of the tracker, that people in the state should be paying attention to?
Yeah. So to go back to when we were putting this together, it's a campaign, a statewide campaign that the governor's running in the middle of a pandemic. So
that's based on things that at the time.
Right.
Things happen.
Right. And like I said, once we lock in the promises, well, we just grade those promises. We left some things out. We didn't put the pandemic in here at all. Obviously, how the governor reacted to the pandemic was arguably the most important thing he's going to do in the second term. But our thinking was, all right, that is such a moving target. Let's hold him accountable as best we can with day-to-day coverage.
Yeah, it's not like we haven't been scrutinizing his efforts there.
Right, and then it was kind of the same logic on hurricane recovery. The Cooper administration has really struggled to get homes rebuilt from hurricanes Florence and Matthew, and there's been a lot of coverage on that. So we thought, all right, that's another thing we're gonna keep this out of the process. And then the final one was social justice reform. In 2020, I mean, I can't remember if this was just before or just after George Floyd was murdered, but social justice criminal justice reform was on the march. And in fact, the legislature passed a bill. People can decide if they're happy with it or not. But the governor had a task force he had put together. It made 125 different criminal justice reform recommendations. We decided that was unwieldy. So, and we also wanted to, the first term promise tracker, Jack, started by my predecessor, was 31 different metrics that were being graded. We shrunk that down to 9. So a lot of important stuff had to go. I mean, quite frankly, a lot of really important stuff had to go.
I think a lot of our listeners would be curious to hear, when you're pulling this together, when you're asking questions directly of the Cooper administration, when you're pressing them on these issues, how do they respond?
The governor's office does not care for this exercise. And I honestly, they've got some points. I mean, it is a fairly subjective thing, like, oh, did we significantly expand broadband access? Well, who decides that? Well, Travis Fain and Laura Leslie just kind of try to figure it out. I get it. I've described it many times as an honest and imperfect exercise, and that's what it is. We're trying to boil down an entire tenure. Most of what we do is not on the promise tracker here, is not asking the governor's office, all right, how'd you do here, here, and here? We go to the agency. Now, of course, the agency that Governor Cooper has probably hired the head of, but we say, all right, here are the metrics. Some of these metrics we have pulled directly from things you have said in the past, where you have said, these are the metrics, so give us the numbers. Broadband is an example of that. Another example of that, and this was kind of a success story, is increasing diversity in the teaching ranks. There are very few, for example, black male teachers. And that kind of there are a lot of studies that say, if your teacher looks a little bit more like you, you are going to do better. You have a role model. That has been a real priority for the Cooper administration and for others. And so the governor had this task force that made all these recommendations. And we said, all right, here are 4 metrics from the task force. If he gets one of them, we're going to count that towards success. We also counted towards success that they increased what the Teaching Fellows program, where they'll pay for your college if you stay in North Carolina and teach, to historically black colleges and universities. Well, the legislature expanded it to 3 HBCUs. They hit one of the metrics, so we marked that one achieved. So that's just, I'm kind of going the long way around the barn here, but that's just to say that we boil it down to metrics as best as we can, and then we just look and see if you've hit those metrics or not. and kind of like you can like it or dislike it, but you either did or did not check the box that I admit we drew the box. Like, these are our boxes. We decided this is how we're going to judge it, but we try to be open. We try to be honest and just kind of explain how we're doing it and what we're doing.
Well, Travis, thanks for your work on the tracker and for breaking it down for us. It's important work.
All right. Thanks for having me.
That's WRAL State Government reporter Travis Fain. To check out the Promise Tracker, just search WRAL Promise Tracker in your favorite internet search engine, and it should pop right up. Or look for it at WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.